Ex-convicts, what is the worst thing you have ever seen a guard do while in prison? Once saw a correctional officer stomp the back of an inmate's head and watched the heel of his boot literally scalp the guy. Huge chunk of head meat and hair stuck to a black boot still sits fresh in my memory, yet it was 6 years ago. T was 6 years ago. 6 years ago. 6 years ago. Same guard was smuggling in spice and heroin. Spice and heroin. The inmate probably owed a debt is my speculation. Is my speculation. My speculation. Speculation. Edit. Spice as in synthetic marijuana. Synthetic marijuana. Synthetic marijuana. Not common lol. Jesus Christ man, how do you even do that shit? Correctional officer was by himself and caught dude in the bathroom away from cameras. Away from cameras. Didn't say a single word, just dropped him and stomped one good time hard enough to peel his top off. Peel his top off. Literally. Off. Literally. Correctional officer then called back a ban. Aggression, which is why he took him down. Same correctional officer got cracked with a softball bat a couple months after that, and that was the end of softball on level 3 yards at the complex I was at WH. It really sucked. That was the only piece of shit correctional officer that I encountered during my whole bit. Most of them are honestly pretty decent humans. Decent humans. Give respect, get respect type of people just doing their jobs. Doing their jobs. I spent a weekend in a city jail/processing facility, not a full-blown jail/prison, due to a DUI. Yes, I was a ducking idiot. I got 3 interesting stories out of it. 1. There was a guy in solitary across the room banging on the door. Obviously it's steel, but it still seemed like he might somehow break it. He was screaming, "They sold my bitch crack," over and over. I saw 4 guards line up with riot gear and batons and go in. I just heard blows landing, and I saw clothes flying out of the cell. They marched that man out of the cell, and he looked like that scene in Con Air where they bag and gag them. I was a little more nervous after that. 2. When in the drunk tank with 15 or 20 other dudes. One dude was sitting on the back of the toilet, i.e. where the tank in theory would be, with his feet on the seat. Another guy came up and said he needed to use it. He said go ahead, and just spread his legs. We were all a little taken back. 3. I spent the entire night talking and getting to know 2 different guys. They both seemed very nice. Like they were picked up for something stupid. We get in front of the judge, and it turns out he had beaten someone within an inch of their life earlier that night. Just goes to show you never can tell. On another note, I expected it would be incredibly locked down. However, all the cell doors were open, and while you're expected to stay in your cell, in theory you could have wandered all around that area. Kind of surprised me. 2. Is a power move, or a come on. My post is kind of late, but I got out of prison in upstate New York in October. I saw crazy shit. Prison is a wild place. One time there was a fight in my pod. After fights they have everybody stripped down to their drawers in their cubes so the co's can walk around and do body checks to see who was in the fight. Well, the people in the fight wore gloves so their hands were fine. One guy's hands were shaking. They asked him why. He said he was cold. They said bullshit and took him to the day room. We hear him getting beat for a solid 5 minutes, then a van came and picked him up. The next day I heard from somebody in my vocational CL, but they took the guy that co's beat to another pod in 5 minutes. After he got there claimed there was a fight and did the strip search again, then beat him in the same manner and brought him to the box this time. Another thing I saw happen was in the yard. Somebody was smoking K2 and passed out. Well, while he was on the ground the co started kicking him and they had to take him to the hospital. Prison is a crazy place. Highly recommend not going. Cheers for the recommendation. I had a friend whose brother was a prison guard. He had some stories, but the only one I remember was a time when there was a prisoner in solitary for a while who had become very attached to a praying mantis that had somehow made its way into his cell. The mantis lived with him for quite some time and he loved it like it was his friend. One day a prison guard who wasn't aware of the mantis being important to this prisoner stepped into the cell, saw the mantis, and promptly slammed his hand down on it to kill it. The prisoner was, understandably, devastated. Edit. Wow. Didn't expect this much attention. Haha. To clarify some things, This happened at least 10 years ago in Australia. It was not the US prison system. I don't know much about how the Australian prison system runs, but my understanding is that it's not quite as inhumane as the US system. The fact that they used solitary confinement sucks, but it wasn't as bad as it is in the US. This is so sad. Reminds me of the Green Mile. I'm a co. And one of the worst things I ever saw was an officer kidney punch a handcuffed inmate. Naturally, I reported it. That officer is now a deputy warden. Specifically, my deputy warden. True story. Sucks good people like you can't get that position, instead some animal does. Well, I applied for a DW position in another facility. I will never promote any further in this one under the current leadership this last summer and didn't make the second round of interviews. So at this point, I'm thinking lateral movement out will be the only alternative at present. I worked at a maximum facility and I was super respectful. No need not to be ever. And the men there were always super respectful back. It's frustrating that other officers didn't realize this, and administration didn't realize that the same officers who kept having issues were having issues because they were starting it. I really enjoyed my job. I was super strict because I have a fear of getting in trouble. I communicated well and seriously never had issues. My favorite memory was I was working straight 16 to 17 hour shifts for 27 days in a row before I was scheduled for a major surgery. The inmates knew because it was a small prison and no one keeps their mouth shut lol. But I was sitting in the guard box on the yard and I looked at my watch and it was 1700 and blinked and it was 1800 and an inmate is tapping on the window, letting me know second shift was on. So I wouldn't get in trouble. I obviously didn't mean to fall asleep. I was just exhausted. It was just a super nice thing to do. Turns out that if you respect someone they might just respect themselves. Thank you for being a good person. We should rehabilitate people, not endlessly punish them. Ex-convict here. There's a long list of fucked up shit that I've seen, and it's hard to really say which was the worst. Rape and assault is obviously the worst out the gate, but there's a lot of close seconds because of how long the fucked up things would last. Forced semi-starvation is one. Being in lockdown in our cells for weeks or months at a time without being allowed into the commons meant we basically lived as if in solitary confinement. Usually got put on lockdown because someone fucked it up for everyone, but sometimes it was an unwarranted lockdown. It came with a whole host of issues, but lack of food was common. Meals were passed through the doors on trays during lockdown. Accidentally forgetting 3/4 of the meal portions on specific trays, or forgetting certain cells trays completely would mean that an inmate would get just enough food to survive, but would be slowly starved. It was usually just a specific correctional officer who had a grudge against a specific inmate, vs a collaborative effort, laborative effort, but knowing that you're going to not get at least 2 of your meals for the day, and having no alternative way to get out of your cell to procure food for weeks at a time was awful. There was also something we called tile therapy. It was when a correctional officer would decide that you needed an attitude adjustment and would do a takedown, tackle, to restrain you to take you to solitary or your cell instead of simply cuffing or even verbal LLY escorting you. If an inmate fully warranted it, it was not referred to as tile therapy. As tile therapy, aisle therapy, therapy. Tile therapy specifically referred to the hyper-aggressive, completely unnecessary, and violent nature of the takedown in proportion to the offense that determined the need for a takedown. For a takedown, it usually involved smashing the inmate's face into the tile during the initial tackle. To stun and subdue them, but would also include a variety of battery and such. Why and such. For example, a correctional officer broke an inmate's jaw from slamming his floor so hard during one such takedown. I don't even remember what the dude supposedly did because it was something so minor, like not having his uniform shirt tucked in. And there was just so much coercion and manipulation and shit in general. Co's had the power to make your life a living hell if they so desired, and they had a plethora of creative ways to punish you on the books and off. I served 8 years. So I have a lot of stories. Edit. This was in the United States. No, I will not name the state out of maintaining privacy. But yes, it is a backwards hokey budstate. I served my sentence in late 90s to early zeros. Edit 2. Yes, I'm a woman. I served time in a multi-level custody facility that was co-ed. Edit 3. Thanks for all the awards. Exclamation mark. And yes, I'm doing well now. Thank you. Exclamation mark. My friend was in prison recently and told me this story. They were caught with drugs in their cell. The correctional officer came in with 6 to 8 jugs of rotten milk, popped off the lids, and set them down in the cell. He told the inmates he'd remove the jugs the next day, as long as they were still full, i.e., can't flush them down the toilet. Apparently it was a long night of gagging and being miserable. They tried to take shifts covering the jugs with their hands, but of course it was mostly futile. That said, he said it was a better alternative than the hole or other more accepted punishments. Apparently some prisons are trying to phase solitary out, and revulsion-based punishments are one alternative some places are using. Definitely stopped any of them from hiding drugs in the cell in the future, mostly out of fear of the fellow inmates kicking one's butt if they knew you risk getting that punishment for the whole cell again. Guy 2 cells down was diagnosed with terminal stomach cancer after medical refused to test him for 3 straight months. Basically, if they tested him when he went into medical, it wouldn't have been terminal and they could treat it. Instead, it spread to his lungs and several other vital organs. That's just the start. One night, he starts crying out in pain. Said his stomach had ruptured and he was in the worst imaginable pain. It took his cellmate several attempts to get a guard to listen, and after some of them come up to check on the situation, they took a wheelchair from another inmate and told this guy to get into it. He couldn't move, let alone get up, so they had to haul him into the chair, then call the medical staff and have the inmate try to explain the situation to them. Medical staff said he was lying and ignored the situation. The guards, not sure what to do with a man moaning and crying out in pain non-stop, decided to lock him in one of the common rooms overnight and ignore it. Around 9 PM the next morning they finally drive him off to a hospital to get checked out. His stomach did rupture, and by the time he got into surgery his insides had gone septic, and he died. That's fucked up. From what I have read in this thread, that appears to be a standard Tuesday. A friend who did time in a federal prison told me that the intimidation by the guards is far worse than that by other inmates. For the feds I would say so, because people in fed prison are not always hardened criminals. You'll have a prison of hard asses, then a prison for white collar crime, then a prison for pedophiles / non-violent. Supermax is bad. You have to be a tough bastard to work or live that. The other two aren't shit. It'd be easy to intimidate someone for those. I don't know that prisons are really segregated to that extent. My friend is in prison and there are pedos, non-violent, and violent offenders. Probably some white collar crime too. Wife's brother was in Rikers in the 1980s. He said the guards mostly ran much the same as prisoners, in gangs with each other. They intimidated and ostracized and threatened violence to other guards who didn't join in, or didn't approve with what they were doing. So there wasn't much of a good cop or bad cop dichotomy so much as there was a bad cop and a silent cop dichotomy. This involved working with prison gangs to organize beatdowns, rapes, and murders within the prison. They also were the ones to run the drugs into the prison. From what I understand it was just corrupt and awful to the bone in every way imaginable. Anyways, while rape was everywhere in the prison, actual homosexuality was looked down upon and guards generally brutalized homosexuals. In one instance they had a drag queen. They stuck a baton up their butt and beat him on a pretty consistent basis, and would have other prisoners come in and rape him in his cell while they held him down. Guy ended up having HIV, and it spread to a bunch of guys who raped him. In response to this, the guards asked a gang to find the drag queen and murder him outside of the prison. They tried, except the drag queen ended up killing one of the people who tried to murder him, and he ended up back in prison for that, where he was tortured again, and then finally killed. Now, he went back to prison in 2011 to 2014. He said it was radically different. Still awful. but much less chaotic and violent than it was in the 1980s. New York City in general is a lot less scary and violent than it was in the 70s and 80s. One of my favorite things to do was toss cells looking for contraband. It was like a treasure hunt to me. I always was very respectful with inmates' stuff. It could be what most would perceive as nothing, but I respected the inmates' belongings as I would want someone to with mine. If they had a clean locker, I would move things and then arrange the on their bed or another already searched area neatly so when they returned to their cell, they could put things back neatly and efficiently. I had prisoners requesting that I do their checking when it came time. I did my job well and was known for finding a fair amount of contraband. Now I had a coworker who took what you might call the opposite approach. If he could break, ruin or destroy property, he did with glee. He'd open food packages, accidentally spill, throw out photos or anything of the sort. I watched him throw an inmate's legal folder in the toilet and in a separate incident, tear up photos of an inmate's kids. He was an asshole. I reported him naturally, but was basically told that I should appreciate his tenacity. I only lasted 6 months in that environment and was glad to switch roles to being the JED teacher, which was way better. Edit, I can't spell. I never understood why exactly the inmates weren't allowed pictures of their family. It always sucked finding photos while booking them in and having to put them in their folder to be given back at release, whenever that would be. However, I did find one guy yanking it to a picture of what I assume was their much older wife. Definitely not their mother. No, surely not. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe for more videos.